I want you to be a little bit irreverent and not take yourself so seriously with your thinking. You're going to think, wait a minute, now you're asking us to do the opposite with our emotions, and in a way I am. I'm going to suggest that the goal is to instead of push it away, to accept it. And so the old prayer you've heard 1,000 times, it has a second stanza of the alcoholic's prayer. It says this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. You've heard that. The courage to change the things I can. You've heard that. And the wisdom to know the difference. Now that's usually the prayer that they pray at Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. I mean, one of the best ways to deal with anxiety is to have the perspective. I think that's why our Christian perspective is helpful. But here's the rest of his prayer when it was originally written: living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. And we live in a world that is constantly telling you that you're not happy, you're not satisfied, but you deserve to be really happy, really, really happy all the time. And it really jacks you up. And I love his prayer where he says that I may be reasonably happy in this life, and as opposed to I'm going to be ecstatic all the time, because nobody is. It's kind of we live in a time, and this is one of the things that makes you so anxious. We live in a time that some people call hyperstimulation. What I mean by that is we live in a world that you weren't really, your nervous system wasn't designed for. If you play video games, which, you know, I just look at the two guys in here, but if you know kids, if your kids play video games, if they play a first-person shooter game, they will shoot more people in 5 minutes than a police officer will in their entire career. If you go to a buffet meal, you will have more possible calorie intake than your great-grandfather, great-grandmother would have had in a week. I mean, in terms of all the possibilities of the food. People who look at, pornography. On a telephone, in 5 minutes, you can see more erotic imagery than my grandfather saw in his lifetime. I mean, the news is, it's amazing. I was this afternoon. I was literally just picking up something at a restaurant, and I was with Skylar, and they had the news on, and it was just this constant drumbeat of what's going to happen in Pennsylvania and the primaries, and in your grandfather's life, they would have heard about the Pennsylvania primaries 3 weeks after it was over, and it would have been told what was happening, as opposed to it's this crisis. Same thing when the storm comes in. When we lived in Florida, and it was like being stalked by a turtle when the hurricanes would be, when they would say there's a hurricane coming and it's off the coast of Africa, and then they have like 700 different paths it could go on, but one of the 700 paths was right through your backyard, and so everybody's just. And it's just slowly and then it's like the next day, it's like 3 days from now, you may die. And it's like, there's just this constant, you live in a highly stimulated world, that your nervous system, God did a great job in designing our nervous system. If you remember, you're designed to be slightly anxious because that protects you. But you're in a world now that just jacks that all the time, that always is poking at that. I mean, and that's why anxiety is just so, it's one of the many reasons that society, that anxiety is so significant. I mean, just the thought, in my lifetime, I know I'm gonna sound like your grandfather, but in my lifetime, the idea that I'm always available on my cell phone, that's incredibly stressful. We grew up where there's a landline, and you had to, and you called, and if they weren't there, you left a message on a tape recorder, and somebody would play that back, but now everybody's got a phone, you're available all the time, you can get instant, and you think, well, that's so convenient, it's such a great time to be alive. It is in some ways, but you've got to understand it is a very anxious time to be alive. And if you've got a nervous system that's already a little jacked up, you have to be able to endure, this very stimulating world. Does that make sense? I mean, if you just think about it, anyway, I was going to give a dumb example, but I think you get the idea. So the idea is changing our relationships to our thoughts and our emotions rather than trying to change our thoughts and feelings. Just a quote by the most beautiful people we know are those who have known defeat, they've known suffering, they've known struggle, they've known loss, and they have found their way out of those depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. They're created by how they go through crisis. And so part of the question with emotions, if I'm going to question my thinking, my emotions kind of sneak up on me in a different way. So emotions are kind of like a dashboard light on your car. The issue is not your emotion. The issue is there's something going on in your heart that has tripped that emotion. So and sometimes I'll repent for the emotion instead of the issue of my heart. Sometimes I'll deal with my emotion but not deal with my heart. I'm sorry I yelled at you, instead of, well, I'm sorry that I'm demanding that you live, there's something about me being dissatisfied and demanding life on my terms. So it would be foolish to just cut the wires of your car to keep the light from coming on. But that's kind of the Christian view of emotion. The Christian view of emotion is like, oh, you can't trust emotion. You can't. The heart is deceptive, and so don't trust your emotion. And the Christian view of dealing with emotion is kind of to say, well, emotions can't be counted on. Faith and facts can, but not emotion. So let's just clip the wires. And I don't think God intended for the engine to not be connected to that light. Now, the psychological answer is just as bad, but it's the other extreme. The psychological answer is your emotions are everything. I mean, live by your emotions. What do you feel? How do you feel about how you feel? What do you feel about feeling? And that's just as exhausting as trying to keep the beach ball under the water. I think that's what most of us do with our emotions. It's like we take a beach ball. Do you ever do that when you were a kid? You try to push the beach ball under the water, and it's exhausting. And if you're really good and coordinated, you might be able to keep it down, but you sure won't enjoy the swim, because that will take all your energy. And that's what a lot of us do with our anxiety. Instead of allowing ourselves to feel it, read it, and move through it, we try to just push it away. It's really funny. You probably don't get over when people that struggle with panic attacks. And does anybody know somebody who struggles with panic attacks in here? I mean, do you like have a friend or one of the signs that someone is starting to kind of move past a panic attack is not when they don't have them anymore, but when they kind of realize, wait a minute, I had that and it didn't kill me. It only lasted 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Yeah, it was uncomfortable, but it didn't kill me. It's almost a Lamentations 3. Y'all familiar with Lamentations 3? Lamentations is a book that if I were God, and that's never have that statement in a sentence, I would never have let that book be in my book, because Lamentations 3, the author is just brutal to God. I mean, he's saying, why do you're like a bear waiting to drag me into the woods. You're like a lion ready to pounce. I mean, it is just a berating. The writer is berating God, and then there's a moment where it just shifts, and it basically says something to the effect of, depending on the translation, but that didn't destroy me. Great is thy faithfulness. Your mercies are new every morning. And that song that you sometimes hear sing in worship of, great is thy faithfulness, your mercies are new every morning, comes not from a guy who just won the lottery. It comes from somebody who is in incredible despair, kind of like what you might call a panicky attack, or and they kind of get to the place where they go, yeah, that panic attack was horrible, but it didn't kill her. So something sustained me during that. God, you must have sustained me in that. Great is thy faithfulness. And that's just an example of feeling the emotion and going through it, as opposed to trying to bury it. I think I talked about the idea of spiritual bypass. At least I talked about that in my Sunday school class. Spiritual bypass is something that we Presbyterians are very good at. But sometimes we spiritually bypass with cognition, like, well, I know this, and I've figured it out, and that's what I'm going to do. But spiritual bypass is, instead of really dealing with it, you say some platitude that in the right context might have been true, but it's probably not true for that person at that moment. Have you ever seen somebody who's at a crisis, like a death of someone they love dearly, and you say something like, I'm so sorry, and they go, I guess God just needed another flower in his garden, and you want to go, I don't think you're right there yet. I mean, maybe a year from now, 6 months from now, you can say that, but I think today, you're probably supposed to be just, feeling that, the sorrow of that, instead of a spiritual bypass. We have a friend who just lost her, just an incredible story, a very sad story. And she just lost her 2-month-old. And she was in the hospital about to die herself. And she gets news that her husband calls and says, our baby's not breathing. And so she's kind of this generation. So she's puts all her things on Facebook and TikTokers and all that stuff. And people aren't responding anymore, because she's not saying the spiritual, she's a very spiritual person, loves Jesus. But before this happened, she was always everything's great and God's so good to me, and she's just lamenting. And what she's finding is people aren't responding back to her, because they want her to spiritually bypass it. They want people to, there's a reason that once somebody's called terminal, people visit them less often in the hospital. We want to avoid the truth and what we feel, and God is wanting to say, wait a minute, I'm strong enough to walk you through what you feel. Don't live your life based on a lie, but change your thinking. But what you feel, you don't have to pretend it's not there. I can walk you through that. It doesn't have to win. A lot of times people will talk about negative emotions and positive emotions. So if you were to use that kind of language, what would you say is a positive emotion?
Joy.
Yeah, joy. What else?
Contentment.
Happiness, excitement, love, romance, all those are kind of positive emotions. When you think of negative emotions, what do you tend to think of?
Sadness,
Depression, sadness, anxiety. Well, the truth is, it's probably better to just see emotions as natural instead of positive or negative. because there are people that actually will pay money to experience what we would call negative emotions. We just finished Halloween. In Orlando, Universal Studios is kind of the Disney wannabe place down there, and they have a thing called horror nights, and it's just brutal. And adolescents, college students, pay $40 a night to go in there and just get the stew scared out of them. I mean, people come up and shake them. I mean, people are, you have to sign a waiver when you go. I mean, it's like people just paid money to experience the things you and I are trying to avoid. You know, they're paying money to feel anxious. They're paying money to feel afraid. They're paying money to feel tense. If you like horror movies, and remember, God wired us to be a little anxious, and that's part of why you like those adventure movies just a little bit, because you at your best will enjoy a little of that, not too much of that. But people, I mean, you go up to Pigeon Forge and people will strap into one of those little bungee things that, you know, that shoot them up in the air. I mean, 30 years ago, that would have been a test pilot who was a test pilot with the Air Force is in there, and they're going, okay, we're going to try to see how many G's we can. Now adolescents are lining up and bidding $50 to be shot up in a rubber band and just, their brain to be, and what will they feel when they're in it? They'll feel frightened. They'll feel anxious. They'll feel scared. They'll be screaming, and they paid for that. And so, the reason I want you to not think positive emotions or negative emotions, other than instead just kind of natural emotion, is I want you to be able to walk through those emotions instead of to be controlled by them and say, okay, so I'm feeling anxious. What's going on with that? I'm feeling scared. It's not going to destroy me. What's going on with that? So people spend time and money for negative emotions, scared on roller coasters, angry at sporting events. I hope it's not the way I preach, but I know preachers that just want everybody to feel guilty. And I know people who go to church and they kind of just want to be beat up, and they know what they're going to get. They're going to know basically Sunday he's going to really just clean our clocks, and they come and they sit, and it's almost like I want to feel that kind of negative emotion. Some kids who are cutting themselves, a lot of the kids that now kind of cut themselves, they're not cutting themselves to kill themselves. I mean, in my generation, if you were going to cut yourself, it was because you want to kill yourself. Most of those kids, when you talk to them, is they want to feel something. And so pleasure and pain both feel alive. And if you go through a roller coaster, when it's over, you feel alive, even though it was scary. After you go through Universal's Horror Nights, I would guess. I mean, when it's over, you probably go, man, I can't believe we got through that when that guy jumped out and yelled at us. I mean, because there's something about intense emotions that do make you feel alive. And so there's something helpful. The one problem that we have with trying to shut our emotions down is you can't just shut off negative emotions. I work a lot with, I used to work a lot in Orlando with first responders. Little city called Maitland. I worked with their fire department and their first responders. And they had incredible problems with divorce. And part of the reason was to be a really good first responder, you've got to be able to shut off your emotion, right? I mean, you come up on an accident, you can't fall apart when there's a dead body there. You can't feel sorry for the person who, you've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with it. So they learn to cut off their emotion. But then when they come home, they can't turn that emotion back on, because when you cut off the negative, you're also going to cut off the positive, and they become almost vanilla in their relational style, because that's what's required to be successful. And those school teachers that have been at it a long, long time, I mean, I know you've worked with some. Some of them are just, I mean, it's almost like they've cut off hoping that kids will get better. And, I mean, they've cut off the negative emotions they feel, so they've also cut off the hoping that they feel.
We just did a series at work and it's all on compassion fatigue. And that it's called this guy's doing the thing on the science of compassion fatigue and the industries that work with that and how it just really does, it just shapes you, it changes you, you know, not, because when you give and you have to kind of cut that off and you go home into your personal life like that, it's really difficult.
Yeah, and that's and I know what you do, that's, I mean, that's significant, you know, you hear hard stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go to my grave with secrets. I mean, I've got, goodness gracious, I know things that people have told me that they've never told anybody else, and I will hold those until I die. But there's something about that carries with it a little bit of, you know, what do you do with those feelings? And so I'm going to suggest to you that what God would invite us to do is not be controlled by our feelings, but to feel our feelings and kind of move through them instead of to try to spiritually bypass them and to shut everything down. So let me talk about what I mean by that in a minute. If you're wired to not accept hard things. I mean, you're wired to protect yourself. That's how God made us. If I said, okay, we're gonna have an art class, and all of you were expert sculptors, and I said, okay, I want you to sculpt a person who is in anguish, who's sad, who's broken. Okay, that's what you're gonna sculpt. Would his head be up or down? What do you think? Would we be looking down? Would his arms be up or would they be in? Yeah, probably in. Would he be large or would he be small? If I said, okay, now I want you to do a sculpture of a player on the Georgia football team yesterday after they won the Tennessee Vols game, and would their head be up or down? Their arms would be out and up. They would be large. They'd be sitting in the room really big. Well, as silly as that sounds, they've done research like that in every culture, every tribe, every subgroup, and it's universal. That we are made by God when there's negative things happening to close in and pull in, and when things are good to kind of open up, and that is physiologically, it's wired in us. And so it's very counterintuitive to do what I'm gonna ask you to do, which is instead is to go, okay, to stop for a second and go, okay, this anxiety is not going to kill me, and open yourself up to it as opposed to kind of shutting down to it. And so I'll give you here's a weird example. Anybody have a birthday nearby? When's your birthday?
December 5th.
Say all of us in here, we're gonna throw you the greatest birthday party you've ever had, and all of us, we got together, we called everybody you've ever known, we've called students that you had in class, we've got other teachers you've had. I mean, we have rented out, you know, I mean, we even let LSU people come to the game, which is, one of your deals. I mean, we've got music, stuff that would make you come alive. We've got music, we've got everything. But say you and a friend that everybody knew was your friend had a huge falling out the night before. I mean a Donnybrook. I mean I'll never talk to you again, you'll never talk to me again. I mean just a super fight. But all of us, not knowing that, planning the party, so you're now invited to the party, and you're there, and it's a huge crowd, and you realize weep through the party, and all of a sudden you think, oh no, let's think of somebody's name that we could, Chuck Wagon, you got a big fight with Chuck Wagon, and all of a sudden you go, oh no, I'm sure they invited Chuck Wagon because they knew he was my friend. Oh no, what'll happen if, I told him I never wanted to see his ugly face again last night. I told him I was really mad at him. I am so, what if Chuck comes? What would happen to her at the party? How would the party go for her as she was afraid of this unwanted guest?
Wouldn't be fun anymore.
She wouldn't have fun. The people around her would kind of notice that she wasn't having that much fun. She'd be preoccupied with trying to figure out what to do if this guest shows up. And it would pretty much ruin the party for her. So, what if instead she said, I can't control whether Chuck comes or not. So she goes out and puts a sign on the door that says, hello, Chuck. I'm having a big party here today, and I know you might be invited. You're welcome to come in. I know we had a big fight yesterday. She put it in the envelope and Chuck would read it. It would be there, but and then, with just a little bit of when Chuck shows up, he reads this. If Chuck doesn't show up, he doesn't. But I'm not going to let Chuck destroy my party. It'd be a whole different experience. Well, she might look at the door every once in a while. She might, make sure, see if she could see the back of the envelope through the window and see if he had come or not. But it would be a very different experience because instead of living in fear of that showing up at the party, she acknowledged the possibility of it coming to the party, said how she's going to deal with it, and then went on and tried to live based on the fact that it was a great party. What I'm trying to suggest that you do with anxiety, with your emotions. Remember, I want you to not take your thinking that seriously. But your emotions, what I want you to try to think about those and say, what would it be if since I can't control whether they come or not, what if I welcome them, experience as best I can, and then live by my values? I want to be a person who enjoys the party. What would it be like to see that differently? And so all I'm trying to get you to do tonight is just think about emotion as a guest to a party. And you can't control whether they come or not, but you can control what you do when they walk in the door. We do live in a culture that kind of tells us we're not supposed to feel. Stop crying, even if it was legitimate. I think my mother's line was, and I had good parents. I'm just, but we're out. My kids will say, Dad used to say, my mother used to say things like, "I'll give you something to cry about," or "I'll take you upstairs. You'll come down with a different attitude." Those are two of my mother's favorite things. Don't worry about it. You should be happy with this. Don't get mad. There's to deal with your emotions by pretending they're not there is a strategy that won't ultimately work. God doesn't want you to completely ignore your emotions, and so they're going to bubble up somehow. Have you ever talked to somebody and they go, "I'm not angry," and you say, "Well, could you tell your face? Because your face looks pretty angry." One last thought, because I'm asking you to do something that is very counterintuitive, even to you physiologically, where you would close in if you had a bad emotion. I'm asking you to open up to those emotions as a way of kind of getting through them. I'll give you one more dumb example. This is something that you'll never have to worry about, but if somehow you get dropped in the Serengeti and you're walking through the jungle and you end up in quicksand, there's a great chance of that happening. Does anybody know what you're supposed to do if you're in quicksand?
Be still.
You're supposed to, it's the opposite of what you think. I mean, what you mostly do, you're exactly right. You be still and you widen up. Because what happens when people get in quicksand is they get small and try to fight, and the smaller they get, the more their body mass goes down, and the more they fight, the more they go down. Whereas if they spread out, and their body is then across the entire quicksand, they can literally kind of crawl out of the quicksand. Now, so this class may not have been helpful, but you now know how to survive quicksand. So I mean, there's a great thing to know.
Have you ever heard the joke, if you grew up watching Scooby-Doo, I was much more scared of quicksand than reality is, you know? I really kind of thought I was gonna hit it all the time as a kid, you know?
And that's true when you're a kid. In the comics, when they were always, it's like, they're in quicksand. I've never, I'm 65 and I've never seen
I've never
quicksand.
stumbled upon any
I've
quicksand.
never known, I've never met a human being who's actually even been in quicksand. However, I did grow up with cartoons that were always in quicksand. I remember that. Listen to this quote. It's by Scott Peck. Peck wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled, kind of a psychologist. It's not, but here's his quote. The tendency to avoid problems and the emotional suffering inherent in them is the primary basis of all human mental illness. The basis of all human mental illness is a tendency to avoid problems and emotional suffering inherent in them. I've got a dear friend. They don't live here. You'll never know. They're married, and she has never been able to forgive herself for the way their relationship started. And 4 children, 30 years later, she is almost can't function as a person. And the reason for her, and she's gone to all sorts of treatments and all sorts of things, really at the bottom of it is a shame of something that happened. She's so afraid it's going to be caught. And she's hidden it and hidden it and hidden it. And now she's, that what she would be considered significantly mentally ill by today's standards. And the truth is, she was just trying to avoid her, avoid kind of what she was, what her feelings. Henry Nouwen, I liked Henry Nouwen. He's a great Christian devotion thinker. It makes you wonder if the diversion to look for the many things outside of us might not be an attempt to avoid the confrontation that is inside us. Most real legalistic people I know that are focusing on everybody else's little behavior, they're doing that because they don't want to deal with their own hearts and their own selfishness and their own. So they are, they're correcting everybody else, but they're not looking at their own life. Indeed, the truth that many people never understand until it's too late is that the more you avoid suffering, the more you suffer. Because the smaller and more insignificant things the smaller and more insignificant things begin to torture you in proportion to your fear of being hurt. And your avoiding suffering is bringing you more suffering. There's an exciting, happy thought. A couple of things. Life is about so much more than just avoiding the bad. I have to feel less anxious before I can do what matters. That's not true. I love the astronaut's quote when they asked an astronaut how he had the courage to go into space, and he said, "Courage is not. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. Courage is about fully being afraid and then doing what makes sense to it anyway. Because the person who doesn't feel fear is just stupid. If you're an astronaut and you're not a little bit afraid when that thing shoots off, you go, this was made by government workers. If you're not a little bit nervous, then something's wrong with you. God places the best things in life on the other side of fear. So what is it like to kind of think about this idea of acceptance, accepting your emotions instead of running from your emotions? Learning to be with your difficult emotions. That's different from learning to be with them, learning to sit with them, learning to learn from them is a way that helps you to become more whole, more integrated, better able to face future challenges. One of the reasons that I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and so I made lots of early mistakes in my life. You wouldn't believe. But one of the reasons I kind of quit drinking pretty significantly in my life was I was starting to become aware that I wasn't experiencing things because I'm not proud of these moments. Like I said, you can't get mad at a pig for eating slop. That's what pigs do. And if you don't know Jesus, don't get, it's just, but I just remember I just remember an experience where other people were there and they had this incredible experience and I didn't remember much of it. And I thought, I don't know that I want to live my life in a way that doesn't experience fully the things that are around me. And even though it wasn't because of a Christian reason to kind of quit or not drink as much, it was a reason of I don't want to avoid. I'm willing to pay for some sadness if there's the possibility of hope and joy. So that's the whole idea of kind of accepting and kind of being with your emotion instead of pushing your emotion away. Now that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you want to feel bad. It doesn't mean it's like I'm looking to feel bad. I mean, give me Novocaine. When they're drilling on my teeth. I mean, I'll take that. But when it comes to emotion, the idea of the idea of feeling those will make me a better person. Emotions gift us with revealing where we care and allow our stories to speak forward. Receiving even the pain of the present moment is a strangely wrapped gift. What's interesting, and I'm going to use this example as a very hard example, and I'm not trying to be cavalier about it at all, but it's fascinating. Women that were sexually abused as children are more likely as an adult woman to be raped. Now, you think, well, that's counterintuitive. You would think, no, because what happens is when they were molested as a child, they shut off some of themselves, and they shut down that a part of them, their ability to read and to know, and so then later on in life they'll find themselves in situations that are not safe, and they won't know that it's not safe because they've shut some of that down. And it's a really odd. It's just an odd statistic. I remember the first time I heard someone present that, I thought that can't possibly be true. I mean, you'd think it, and it's really the idea that when you clip the wires to the light on the dashboard that says service engine soon, you're not aware of, you're not aware of what's gonna, you're not aware of what's going on. I'll one last example, and then I'm gonna give you some things to try this week. My son Skylar does not feel internal pain. Now, he feels that if you touch him, he'll go, don't hit me. But when his appendix burst, he was just sitting there. And he got to where he couldn't walk. And Mona took him to the emergency room. They did a CT scan. The doctor comes running out and says, have you given him something for pain? And Skylar's just sitting there. And it's like, well, and they rush him off to emergency surgery. What Skylar will eventually die of someday is something will happen internally that is significant. He won't know that it happened, and that natural system that is supposed to warn him that there's something wrong, he won't know it, and we won't know it because he won't complain about it, and that's how he will probably die. He will probably die because his dashboard light wires, and this is physical pain, not emotional pain, are cut off. And even though you'll think it's internal pain, once it got through the first layer of skin, it was internal pain. I still have a motorcycle, but I used to ride a lot, and Skylar would ride with me. And if you look at Skylar's leg right now, today, there's a dark black area where on his leg, from where he had his leg against the muffler of the motorcycle, and he just rode with it like that until we got home. And then you look at it, it was a, whatever the worst is, third degree or first degree, which is the worst? Third?
It's worse.
It was a third degree burn. He goes to emergency room because he just kept it on that and he didn't feel the pain. And so to this day, that was, 10 years ago. But he, I had decided to say, don't, be careful where you put your feet. So it's ironic, all of you hear that story and you're kind of sad about that for Skylar, but most of you do that with your emotions and you're not sad about it at all. And it's really the same experience. Clipping the wires instead of feeling the feelings. So it's not a matter that you have to want, I want to have pain, but a willingness. So real quick, so what if you could hold your pain and see it differently, or your emotions? What if you can hold it like you would hold a delicate flower? What if you embraced your anxiety the way you would a crying child? Because in a way it is. What if you sit with your experience the way you would sit with a person who had a serious illness? What if you looked at experience the way you would look at an incredible painting? What if you could walk around the room with your experience the way you would walk around while carrying a sobbing infant? What if you honor your experience in the way you would honor a friend by listening carefully, even if it was hard? What if you inhale your experience in the way you would take a deep breath? What if you abandon the fight with your experience the way a soldier might lay down his weapons and walk home? If you take in and carry your experience as you would a drink of glass of water, you carry your experience the way you carry a picture in your wallet. Now those are, it's like Coffield, 50 metaphors. Let's not get carried away. But there's what if I believed Jesus was big enough? What if I believed Jesus was big enough that even my negative emotions I could treat with the way I would treat a crying child, and would say, you're not gonna, and experience it, but not let it, pain entered to, accepted and owned, often becomes the poetry of our lives. That's not supposed to, we're not supposed to seek discomfort. But we are supposed to, but if we always avoid discomfort. Now, I'm gonna use one more analogy that you're gonna say, Coffield, you have no business using this analogy. But when people work out, I mean, you're a workout guy. I mean, you're you know, what really is happening is you're tearing up your muscles. I mean, you work on to tear the muscle so that it rebuilds bigger. And so, I mean, so next time you see some really super beefed up guy with his arms the size of canned hams and he's, you know, kind of walking around like that, just kind of go, you've torn up your muscles. But that's really what he's done is he's gone through the tearing up process for the sake of making something bigger. Over time, things change. We experience simple fear, anger, shame, calm, joy, pride, instead of our inner commentary. That inner commentary that tells us about those things, but we don't experience it. It is in that inner chatter that keeps us enslaved. This week, what I want you to do is I want you to, and can I have two volunteers? Anybody, two volunteers real quick? Out of us, two volunteers?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, one, who
I'll
does
let
one?
you do this.
You two wanna do it?
Sure.
Okay, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna, would each of you take a pitcher of water? Thank you. Take a picture, there you go. Here, I'll just give you some of these too. I'm just gonna put those right there. Now, there you go, one, do that too. Now, in just a second, I'm gonna ask you to put your hand in that. Okay, now, your natural response, your mind will say, take your hand out of this, it's too cold. And you're gonna immediately close your hand to be small. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to keep your hand in there for 2 minutes. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna try to get you to experience it and see if it loses some of its power. And by experience it, I'm gonna ask you to open your fingers initially you'll just put them in there, but kind of open your fingers and we're going to talk about kind of what it feels like, okay? It'll be exciting. All right, so if you would put your hands in the pitcher of water.
Okay.
How's it feel?
Yeah, it's cold.
It's cold. Okay, now
Real
your
cold.
hands, both of your hands kind of fisted up.
Yeah.
Try to spread them as much as you can in there. And do you feel the coldness between any ice in between your fingers?
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
Mm-hmm.
What's it feel like on your fingernails?
Pain.
Pain? Is it, so tell me about pain. What do you mean? Is it just?
It's a burning sensation almost.
Yeah.
That just makes my whole arm not feel happy.
Right.
So the bothersome feelings are going all the way up your arm.
Yes.
So you can feel it up to your elbow?
Yes.
Okay, what
Okay.
about you? Now keep moving now move your fingers and try to get them to kind of really feel the coldness of that. Now, what about you? What's it feel like for you?
Yeah, it's kind of like stinging, tingly. Yeah.
Aren't you glad you came tonight?
So glad.
Now, you've kept your hands in there for about a minute and 15 seconds so far. So not bad,
No.
considering what you would have done initially is just kind of pull your hand out immediately,
Yeah.
and you kind of you know I see your hands shaking. Do you
I
feel?
always shake. I have a tremor.
Okay, well, good.
natural.
I'm glad we're causing some major neurological issue right now in your body. So, so just here real quick, just take a deep breath. Take a deep breath in, and take a deep breath out. Okay, when you take a deep breath in, go, wow, my, this is cold, and then breathe out. It's cold. Just try that real quick. Just.
It's cold.
Okay, but it's the next time. It's cold, but it's not gonna kill me. Try that. It's cold, but it's not gonna kill me. It's cold,
It's cold.
but it's not gonna kill me.
It's not gonna kill me.
It's cold,
It's cold.
but it's not gonna kill me. So, really this was just a cruel thing I want to do.
Yeah.
What I'm gonna do later on is take those pitchers of water, set them in the in the kitchen, and then let all the staff tomorrow go, hey, water, and they'll drink the
Yeah.
water, and they go, this just doesn't taste right, what's wrong with it?
Something
They'll be
to
like,
it.
that's because they got their hands on it. All right, you can put your hands out.
Okay.
So how's your hands feeling right now?
Not good.
Yeah.
Here you go, here's this right here. Now, so here's what I want you to try. And I know this week, this is gonna sound kind of silly, but I just want you to try to feel some things. And so, let me grab my notes. So I want you to open up and practice acceptance this week. So open yourself up to a cold shower. I don't mean the whole time. I mean, take a warm shower, get your good warm shower, and then right before you get out, about 30 seconds before you get out, just turn it cold but don't jump out. Sit in it for just 30 seconds and feel it. Feel the boredom when you pull up to a traffic light, and don't pick up your phone. And just feel the boredom of it. It's not gonna kill you. It's not gonna kill you to be bored and not look at your phone for 2 seconds. We have a tradition in Christianity of fasting. The goal of fasting is to feel hunger, so that when you feel that hunger, it reminds you of a deeper spiritual hunger, and it's supposed to kind of drive you to pray for the people that you're fasting about, or the things you're fasting about. So the secret to fasting is to feel that hunger. And it's really funny. Most people I know that fast are fasting first because they want to lose weight, or they fast and they come up creative ways to not feel, well, but what I'm going to do is I'm deciding to eat lunch this week, and I'm going to, do this instead. So, well, that's not the whole point. The point was to feel the hunger. So we have a tradition. How are y'all's hands? You okay? You did great, both of them. Be aware of hot and cold temperatures. What if you're caught in the rain and you don't have anywhere you've got to go? I mean, I realize if you have somewhere you've got to go, but what would it be like if you're not any place to go to just walk in the rain instead of try to avoid it? Go find a picture of somebody that you love that's passed away, and sit with that picture for a moment and be sad about remember your feelings about that person, and enjoy that. Write a poem about what it's like to be you this week. What was it? Jesus lived openly. Obviously, the imagery of our Savior with his palms out and a nail through his palms is the picture of someone living openly to the people around him. John of the Cross, which was one of the early leaders of our faith. I saw the river over which every soul must pass to reach the kingdom of heaven. And the name of that river is suffering. I saw a boat that carries the souls across that river, and the name of that boat is love. And so, I've got a bunch more kind of things to talk about in terms of anxiety, but I guess the most important thing for today, remember, get in touch with what your values are. Like, you all know, you know that you're supposed to take your hand out of cold water, but your value was to kind of play along and be people that participated, and so you live by your value, not by what so you disobeyed your thinking. What are your values? Don't take your thoughts so seriously, and try to accept what you feel instead of trying to avoid what you feel. And I think what you'll find is your anxiety loses some of its power. And I think what you'll find is that bully loses some of its power. And I think what you'll find is the ability to start doing things in spite of sometimes feeling anxious, because anxiety doesn't get to win. So that's the lesson for today. Next week is our last week in this, and we're going to talk about being living in the present. It is probably one of the most interesting invitations that I think God gives us. I don't know the theology behind this, and so don't split a church over what I'm about to say. But if every moment is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a moment in God's economy, it seems as if for God, every moment is present. I don't know what that means. I can't. My brain just blows up. Mona asked the John Frame, the great theologian, one of the great theologians that worked at RTS, if that's true, then can I pray for Skylar's birth mother who drank, that she wouldn't drink so Skylar wouldn't have his damage? And John Frame said, well, even though every moment's present with God, it's not that way for us. And so therefore, you can pray that, but that's not how God will work, because he uses time. He will use time. But there's something about healthy people that live in the present, because there's not enough guilt and shame that can change anything in your past. And there's not enough worry and anxiety that can change anything in your future. And that the most powerful place to live out the Christian life and to be engaged with people is in the present. And anxiety robs you of living in the present. So let me pray for us. And we're a couple minutes over. I'm sorry, I just wasn't willing to not let you all go home cold. Dear Father, I've so often tried to cut the wires to my heart. Sometimes I'm afraid of the fear. Sometimes I'm afraid of my failures. Sometimes I'm afraid of the future. Somehow you want me to have the courage to, instead of being afraid of those things, is to accept those things and trust you somehow in the middle of that. Father, give us a sense of that kind of acceptance this week, all of us. You know all of us. You know the folks that are in this room that are having trouble sleeping. You know the people that are having trouble with panic attacks. And you know the people that are real snippy with their family and friends because of the anxiety that they're always fighting. So Father, be with them this week as they